It is Tuesday, the 27th of November. Good evening. My name is Michelle Ngele Odhiambo. The big story tonight, the Cabinet Secretary for Health, CS Kariuki, is burning the midnight oil as she puts together a report on the medical equipment services program. When she appeared before the Senate today, CS Kariuki was put to task to explain the contractual process for the equipment that all the counties have been paying for a flat rate of 90 million shillings. And not only are the senators concerned about the medical equipment, pundits in the health sector have also raised a red flag over the equipment that the national government leased at a cost of 38 billion shillings for a period of 7 years. Experts say some machines supplied to counties require humongous amounts of money to maintain in 1 month, and the economic logic to impose them on counties that can hardly finance their basic health budget has been put to question. An MRI machine, for instance, requires at least 3 million shillings to run on its own every month. The health experts who spoke to KTN News on condition of anonymity also say the 38 billion shillings quoted by the national government for the equipment was exceedingly high. Some counties are yet to use the machines since they lack the supporting infrastructure like electricity, water and trained personnel. In one instance, Morans were recorded welcoming a CT scan machine with song and dance at the Narok County Referral Hospital. The machine had been launched by Deputy President William Ruto last week. On the show tonight, I shall be speaking to two gentlemen. Immediate former Bomet Governor Isaac Ruto, who was the last governor to sign the medical equipment contract with the Ministry of Health. We also have Dr. Moses Lore, who is the Secretary General of the Kenya Health Professional Society. But before I engage them, our lead reporter, Sophia Onuna, is on standby at Nairobi's CBD with more on the big story tonight. Sophia, good evening.
Good evening, Michelle. So this medical equipment services program has been controversial from day one. Remember, the counties were vehemently opposed to this leasing of equipment because healthcare is a devolved function and felt that the national government was forcing these machines down their throat without there being a feasibility study done in as far as the take up of the same, the infrastructure available, but more importantly, capacity and personnel that are qualified to manage this equipment. Because remember, we're talking about theater, ICU, dialysis kind of equipment, so quite complex kind of machines in terms of operating the same and the kind of diseases they attend to. But the government argued this is to bring that affordable, universal healthcare, closer accessibility to the people of this very complex and serious diseases that people in different parts of the country face, and also to decongest the referral hospitals like Kenyatta National Hospital so that one doesn't have to travel from the far-flung regions to get treated. But controversy from day one, at the end of the day, they ended up getting the MOU signed. The matter had moved to court, and perhaps former Governor Ruto will be giving us more details about just what transpired at the time. But what we know now of some of the recent developments is that at that time, cumulatively, each county was to pay 4.5 billion shillings. But that was doubled last year to 9.4 billion shillings unilaterally. Again, counties protesting this, saying they were not engaged, asking questions as to what led to this increase, double, if you like. And the government has argued there was a lot of demand for the equipment. But this is a time when some governors, like today, Governor Joho appearing before the Senate Public Accounts Committee, decrying that neighboring counties were coming to seek these services from his county, and yet they also had this equipment, saying there is a breakdown somewhere and that these issues need to be resolved. Issues, again, that were put to the CS Healthcare, that's Cecily Kariuki, and she has to return to Senate because she largely did not have the answers that the senators sought. But let's speak now with Senator Homa Bay County, Moses Kajwang. He's also the chair of the Public Investments and Account Committee of the Senate. He was in that session chairing when Governor Joho appeared. Thank you for making time for us. So clearly a lot of issues that have dogged this program from day one, as I mentioned there. For you, what is it that sticks out the most?
Thank you, Sophia. The managed equipment scheme was well intended. If you go back to the background, the national government thought of a framework approach to providing all the 47 counties with certain equipment which would have been difficult for them to procure individually. What was sold was economies of scale. What was sold was a framework approach. The national government went ahead and negotiated with about 4 or 5 service providers for some very expensive equipment. And in the first year, each county was required to pay 94 million Kenya shillings every year. If you multiply that by 47 counties, 94 by 47, you work it out, it works out to about 500,000 shillings every hour. So the national government every day pays 12 million shillings to this consortium of equipment providers. The problem was that the governors were not privy to the contract. All the governors that have appeared before our committee have said that all they signed was a memorandum of understanding. And an MOU is not a contract. The contract with financials, with scope, with deliverables, with legal terms, that was done by the national government at the exclusion of county governments. And yet it is county governments that pay for this money. We allowed this to proceed because it was sold to us that certain counties like Machakos, Mombasa, etc. were benefiting immensely from this equipment. When we went to Mandera, which had the highest infant mortality rates in the world, we were sold the story that the rates had fallen down, and that county was being touted as a global success story as a result of the managed equipment scheme. Where it started stinking was in the last financial year, when the national government increased the payment due from counties from 94 million to 200 million shillings without any explanation. Governors attempted to find out why are we paying double from 94 to 200 million. And if you pay 200 million a year, you're basically paying 25 million shillings every day. And you can imagine how much more this money can do out in the counties. So today, when we interrogated these matters, the CS for Health, Cecily Kariuki, gave us a schedule telling us that the increment from 94 million to 200 million was occasioned by forex fluctuations. And secondly, it was occasioned by a health information system platform that they're implementing at a cost of 4 billion Kenya shillings. And it was also occasioned by a midterm evaluation they're planning to do at a cost of 200 million shillings. And it was also arising out of a monitoring and evaluation consultancy that was worth about 98 million shillings. The questions we are asking is that you've got counties with different needs. For example, Kakamega County, they told us that when they were given a CT scan machine, they had already purchased a CT scan machine. And what's interesting, Sophia, is that Kakamega County purchased their CT scan machine at 55 million Kenya shillings. The one that was delivered by the national government cost 155 million Kenya shillings for the same equipment. If you look at other counties like Nyamira, the governor appeared before us. He told us that equipment were dumped in Nyamira. This equipment required specialized housing. It took them more than 1 year to put in place the infrastructure. And yet, while the infrastructure, while the equipment was lying idle, they had to pay the 94 million shillings. All the counties are being treated equally. All the counties have to pay that amount of money, whether the machines are working or not. Indeed, one of the governors put it this way, that serikali ilienda Nairobi, ikatengeneza suruali, ikatuletea tuvae bila kupima viuno. Ili wajue kama suruali itatutosha ama itatutosha. That's the situation that we find ourselves in. And we think that this is going to turn out to be very expensive for the counties, very expensive for this country, and it might turn out to be the mother of all scandals.
Yeah, the mother of all scandals. And I had Senator Murkomen, who was chairing this particular meeting, say that his county, for instance, received the machines just last month. And yet from the very beginning, they had already been paying. So that there's also concern, were these machines delivered on time? As we say, this is a scandal in the making.
And that's why we asked the CS Cicely Kariuki to come back when she's better prepared. Because we told her that she must give us a schedule of all the hospitals in the country, because the equipment was supposed to go to 2 hospitals per county. Of all the 94 hospitals across the country, to tell us specifically the equipment that was sent to those hospitals, the date they were supplied, and the operational status of that equipment. Because there are some counties that, as you've said, Elgeyo Marakwet received the equipment fairly late, but they had to pay, just like any other county that had received the equipment on day one. There are some counties with equipment that are lying idle because of lack of expertise. The report that the CS brought to us also highlighted certain counties where the equipment are not working simply because of the absence of electricity. We've been told of last mile being everywhere, but the reality is that there are some major hospitals in this republic that do not have access to electricity that can drive these equipment. They do not have skilled staff. They do not have sufficient infrastructure in the form of buildings. And the question we have asked is, why then didn't the government take a little bit of time to do a scoping to understand the kind of terrain that it was rolling out some of these equipments? Also, very curiously today, when you looked at the schedule of leased equipment that is costing counties 200 million shillings every year or 25 billion shillings every day, some of the equipment include linen trolleys. Some of them include wash basins. Some of them include things that you, in your reasonable thinking, you wouldn't expect the government to be leasing, because those are things that should form part of consumables or part of the equipment that any average or ordinary hospital would have.
Yeah, and as you probe these issues, the concern then would, at this point, has the Senate engaged the government to get that contract so that you then understand this is where the rain started beating us, that this was the deal that was agreed. Is it being implemented as was put pen to paper at the time?
Whenever we inquire into this matter, and today we almost had a point of divergence because the CS was insisting that counties are not paying, that it is the national government that is paying. But it is the Senate that is responsible for a piece of legislation called CARA, or the County Allocation of Revenue Act. That is a piece of legislation that distributes monies across counties. And as long as those monies are included in CARA, those are monies that are going to counties. And as a result, Senate then becomes seized of the matter. The reason the national government brings up that argument is to try and run away from scrutiny and oversight by saying that this is not your baby, Senate, this is a baby of the National Assembly. When the National Assembly attempted to interrogate this matter in the last parliament, I recall, because I was in the last parliament, the contract was not availed to them. And this time round, we have asked the cabinet secretary to come back before the Senate with the contract, because the majority of the governors that we've spoken to have not set their eyes on that contract. Right. They only signed MOUs, and many of them signed MOUs under duress. The governor of Kakamega was with us yesterday. He said that he was being attacked politically, that people are dying in Kakamega because he has refused to sign that MOU. Eventually, he caved into pressure. The governor of Nyamira, the former governor of Bomet, the governor of Meru, there are so many governors who hesitated to append their signatures to that MOU. But because of pressure, because of propaganda, because of concerted efforts and battering from all corners, they eventually signed, but they never set their eyes on the contract. Yeah. This time round, we must see that contract, we must make public that contract, and we must establish whether there's value for money in this, because prima facie, this is not value for money.
Yeah. And as Senate, the question also would be, are you doing enough to hold the national government to account? This is a devolved function. Yes, you saw the opposition early on with the counties and the governors, but then they caved in with time. Now we have one of the big four being affordable healthcare. Again, a devolved function, so that the national government appears to be clawing back on these gains on devolution, and the Senate is sitting back, and yes, we see some of these proceedings in Senate or in various committees, but still the big picture is being ignored, which is these are devolved functions. Why is the national government meddling, quote unquote?
On this particular matter, there is some unity of purpose. Because you saw that the proceedings for today were chaired by the Leader of Majority, Kipchumba Murkomen, and senators took a position with the counties rather than positions with the political parties or the political coalitions where they come from. We realize as senators that if we do not stand with counties, then we don't have a job. In fact, if we are going to be standing with political parties rather than standing with counties, then in the forthcoming referendum, that then should be one of the questions that is put to the people of Kenya, because we have no business doing things in the same old manner or doing things the same way the National Assembly would have done it. Our responsibility, our duty that comes out of Article 96 of the Constitution is to be the defenders, to be the representatives of the interests of counties and their governments. And if you look cumulatively, the 200 million that is currently being levied on counties, and you multiply by 47, you are looking at 9.4 billion Kenya shillings. What more could we do with 9.4 billion Kenya shillings? If it was proper procurement, proper leasing, I believe, looking at the example of Kakamega, where they procured directly at 55 million and the national government is supplying at 155 million, that counties could have used half that money to get the equipment that they need and to scale it up gradually, rather than doing a big bang, taking all sorts of equipment and sending them to West Pokot without caring whether they have electricity or not. Yeah. On this particular matter, I want to assure Kenyans that Senate, we have taken a very firm and very common position that will defend and protect devolution. But at the same time, let it not be thought that we are against the objectives that were initially placed before us. The objectives for this project were noble. Unfortunately, some corruption, some deceit has come in. And that is why you have seen the increment from 94 to 200 million without involvement of the stakeholders, who are the county governments, without proper involvement and engagement of the Senate, because you see, Senate is now interrogating this matter post facto, when it ought to have investigated it or be seized of it before this particular matter was passed.
Yeah. Finally, even as there's increment in as far as what the counties must pay, there's concern, as you touched on slightly a little bit earlier, what this money is being used for. Because former PS Muruguri Health, as he was going out, leaving office, he submitted a report to Senate saying that the concern at the time was some of this money, after it has been set apart to pay for this equipment, was buying microwaves, refrigerators, not these machines. So how are you dealing with that finally?
We must respect the Constitution that says county governments are governments with their own executive structures, with their assemblies, with their planning, budgeting, and execution mandate. We cannot micromanage counties, because if you did that, then it means that even money for agriculture, the national government will start buying seed and will continue to buy fertilizers for counties. It would mean that even the other functions that are devolved, the national government would continue operating like a nanny. I believe that county governments have got the capacity and they've got the necessary constitutional insulation for them to make some of these agreements. And indeed, if they were to do it jointly, it should not be at the behest of the national government, but it can be through regional blocks, or it can be through the Council of Governors or cooperative arrangements between counties. But the question then ought to be, what is the way forward? Beside us calling CS Sicily before Senate and asking several questions, we want to expose this contract, we want to expose this project, and we want to determine whether it is a project or it is a scheme or a scam to defraud the public. But my view, which I share with a number of governors, is that if the national government indeed is serious about the objectives of this project, then that money should be given to counties as a conditional grant. Let counties spend it. But also, as a chair of the Public Accounts Committee, I have had a discussion with the Auditor General And we've agreed that it would be important that we commission a performance audit of the managed equipment scheme, because so far it has not come out clearly. The matter has been politicized. So I want to promise the nation that there is a conversation that is going on, and probably by early next year, the Auditor General shall report on the effectiveness, on the efficiency of this particular project, and whether it constitutes value for money.
Right. Honorable Moses Kajwang, Senator, Homa Bay County, as well as Chair PSC Senate, with us tonight. Michelle.
Thanks, solid reporter Sophia Wanunebe. We'll hear now the sentiments expressed by some of these senators when CS Kariuki appeared before them today.
The contracts were for supply, training, installation, maintenance, replacement where necessary. And to do this, you must carry out some due diligence to know there is water, there is staff, there is electricity, and so on and so forth. Isn't it an act of gross negligence for the ministry and the national government to supply equipment to units they know have no personnel, have no water, have no electricity? And what is the equipment for? If government has entered into a contract where counties are being deducted money and the residents of that county are not benefiting from those equipment, can't we, at the end of today, pass as a resolution to stop any further transference of funds to these contractual obligations, especially for those counties that are not benefiting?
I wonder why the government applied a flat figure of 95 million for every county, and when you look at Appendix 1, not all counties received the same or similar equipment. So why do we apply a flat figure of 95 are now being increased to 200 across the board, and yet we didn't receive a similar equipment? So that must be answered as well.
In studio tonight for more on this conversation, Dr. Moses Lore is the Secretary General of the Kenya Health Professionals Society. Many thanks for your time on the big story tonight. The Managed Equipment Services Program came with a promise of bringing specialized healthcare closer to the people of Kenya. Has this program lived up to your expectations as a medical expert?
Thank you. First of all, let me comment on what my Senator Moses Kajwang has said. I largely agree with a lot of the sentiments, but specifically to your question, I'm not so sure that this scheme has benefited all sectors of the republic, all sectors of the nation. Some counties have benefited, some have not benefited. And also hasten to say that at initiation, this was a very noble project, but I think the implementation has been met with a lot of challenges that perhaps could have been avoided if we put a lot of thought process into the whole thing. It looks like the government was in a hurry to implement it, and it is coming out that it was not clearly thought, and this should have been done.
Of the Senate today. Let's take a look at, let's discuss rather some of the sentiments that we've heard the senators express there. And among them was the question of due diligence, because we're hearing, because the program itself ensured that 2 hospitals in each of the 47 counties was part of this program, which meant 98 hospitals in total. But all the 47 counties have been paying a flat rate of 90 million shillings, despite the fact that some have got this equipment and some did not. So in terms of due diligence, has the Ministry of Health implemented this the right way?
From the facts that are getting out, because we don't have all the facts, it would appear that, like I said earlier, there wasn't a lot of thought process put in this. And as a health professional, I would tell you that even as I speak here, there are areas where the equipment are still lying. They are not being utilized, right, which means that the government did not do proper analysis before it put implementation into this thing. In some areas, the equipment are there, but there are no staff. In some areas, the equipment is there, like Senator Moses Kajwang said, the power that is available in these counties cannot support this equipment. Some of this equipment need three-phase power, but they only have two-phase, so they cannot utilize this equipment.
Right.
So the government should have done all this background check before the implementation was started. And in fact, as a Kenya Health Professional Society, we believe that a phased-out implementation would have been the best, so that counties received equipment when they were ready for it, as opposed to equipment being brought to you, and then you can't use it for years. I mean, I was just talking to a colleague from Kericho,
right,
who now say they are celebrating the benefits of this equipment, but it has taken them almost 2 years to start using them. Because one, they were not trained staff. For example, in renal dialysis, they had no renal nurses. The county government had to invest huge sums of money to go and train renal nurses before this equipment could start being used. And this is something that the government should have thought at before they started implementation.
Right.
So from our side, we think this was a big gap that the government should have really looked at before starting to implement these things.
And let's just expound more on this, because pundits say this might just be another multi-million or multi-billion shilling corruption scandal in the Ministry of Health, yet to be confirmed. But what were the intended purposes of the managed equipment program, a services program, and how was it meant to benefit the Kenyan?
Truth be told, even in the developed world, that is the direction that the sector has taken, that because obtaining or acquiring equipment and then maintaining them at personal level as institutions is normally difficult.
Right.
So many countries have gone through what we call placements or managed equipment schemes. But normally it's done in such an organized manner that because of the economy of scales in the areas that they are put, for example, our counties, there are a lot of patients. So we would imagine that with the economies of scale, this equipment would be used efficiently. But the government didn't put a thought process in that.
Right.
And we think that actually this would be a very good thing if it is properly managed. If more thought was put into the whole process, it would really help people. And now that we are going the universal healthcare way, it would be proper that all the institutions, the places that these things are organized, well organized. They have sufficient human resource, they have the necessary infrastructure, they have the necessary equipment, so that the whole thing can meet the ultimate goal of bringing good healthcare closer to the people.
All right. We've seen a lot of back and forth, especially after devolution between the Ministry of Health and medical professionals. The government leased this equipment at a cost of 38 billion shillings for a period of 7 years, began implementation in 2014. But experts say some of these machines that are required to be supplied to the counties under this program require a humongous amount of money to maintain, too huge amount to put on a county which can barely, finance their basic healthcare budget. That again put into question, what do we need to put in place to ensure counties can manage this program?
Before we could even answer what we put in place, I mean, managed equipment schemes or placements are not even new to Kenya. If you go to the private sector in this country, a lot of these institutions don't actually do outright purchases. When you go to laboratory diagnosis, when you go to some radiological equipment, they do what is called a placement. And the placement basically operates on, they bring the equipment, they service it, they maintain it, but then what happens is that you sell the consumables at a slightly higher rate, normally not exceeding 40%. But in our scenario, we are seeing accessories, consumables, and even the equipment are being bought at about 300% the value,
right,
which is really very surprising and sad for a third world country like ours, where resources are very meager and we need to manage them prudently.
Right. And this comes at a time when the country is talking about attaining universal health care in line with international standards. Like you mentioned, the managed equipment, medical program there is what the world is moving towards. In terms of legislation, how far are we as a country?
I think, just like the Senator put, I think we are still lagging behind. The legislation is not adequately addressing some of these issues.
Right.
The regulatory framework is still weak, and like if you look at the specific example that we are giving about the radiological equipment, you find that a large chunk of the professionals who are handling this equipment are not regulated, therefore posing the danger that Are they doing the right things, or are they just trained to use the machines and produce results which cannot be helpful to them? These are questions that the government need to take into consideration so that this thing can work. But otherwise, if everything is not put properly together, then I must say that there is a big chance that it will not succeed.
All right, all right. Dr. Moses Lore is the Secretary General of the Kenya Health Professionals Society. This is the big story. Do stay with us. More on the other side.